control the time, but
But I'm starting to record.
all right.
Good
We gotta.
idea.
And I'm going to start. Let
Do
me
you want
set
me
up
to
the
admit
live
everyone, or
stream. Live stream.
you're sick?
Custom.
You want to let folks in, or
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
okay? Here they come.
Morning.
Morning.
Good
Morning.
morning.
Yo, yo, Mr.
Everybody
Shaw.
should be everybody should be muted that came in. I don't know why we're not
Oh, right.
muted. Because I set that setting
Yeah.
earlier.
I did not touch
It
it.
didn't mute me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm mute now.
You can still change that in the participants list.
Yeah, we can hit the big button, mute all.
No. Meaning you can change for anybody coming in, you can
Oh.
change it to.
Yeah. Chris, we're
I
gonna talk a little politics, then I'm gonna introduce you.
Okay.
And then you're gonna do your presentation and then take questions, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
I've done it a few times. Chris, this is Duke. I'm really looking forward to this.
Awesome.
Glad to hear that.
Okay. It's 9 o'clock and we're rocking and rolling. So good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. We'd like to welcome everybody into Cafe Americana, where we want to hear what you have to say. So we have the big, bad, beautiful bill still being discussed on the Senate floor. And I'm going to talk about the Senate Parliamentarian. But before I do that, I'm going to bring Andres and Mike in to just give a little update on what's going on, what they feel about the big, beautiful bill. And then we'll talk about the Senate Parliamentarian, what this purpose is. And then we're going to move on to bringing in our special guest, Chris Simmons, today to talk about DEI, which we're all what's really good is we're all enthusiastic about learning about it. Because, the problem when we hear DEI, if you're on the right, you have this like knee-jerk reaction without really understanding what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's great that Chris will come on. Chris is not only, we know he's our MBA from Harvard guy, but Chris is a well-established man in the business community, and also he's a mentor. So he'll know more about DEI than most of us, and he'll be able to enlighten us, which I think is great. So, Andres, what do you think? What's going on with this big, beautiful bill today?
Well, we had one of the longest votes on Saturday for the motion to proceed. So they started the vote. Usually, for those who don't follow along, that's an hour-long call for senators to put in their vote. They kept that open for a couple of hours because they need to convince people in the Senate, like, hey, let's go forward and start voting on this. So similarly, we've had this votorama since 9:35 a.m. yesterday. It is still going on. The votorama is when senators from both sides get to add as many amendments as possible up until they get tired of it all and they decide, okay, we're done with proposing our amendments, and then we can move on to the next segment, which is actually closing up the vote so they can vote on the final bill. During the votorama is when a lot of the promises were made to those people on Saturday who were kind of on the fence why they kept the vote open for a while. Some of those promises came to be with votes happening. Some of those haven't, including notably in the last 24 hours, there was no vote to gut Medicaid expansion that happened under Obamacare. They just decided they didn't have enough people, so they're not going to put it on. But that was a key concern for people like Senator Ron Johnson and other fiscal hawks. At this point, it's anybody's game. But the one thing that we're hearing from the House side, remember the House has to pass this also, is the Speaker Johnson is saying, just please go back to what I sent you. Please don't change it anymore. I can't convince my people. So
Yeah,
long road ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say the couple things that I saw that were interesting, and I know we'll get into it. I'll segue to you, feed it to you in a minute here. But the Medicaid Planned Parenthood provision survives. That one was the thing. There's a tremendous inertia in the Senate to keep things as they are for the most part. That one was one I saw that was interesting to me, and then the other one was Marsha Blackburn, Senator Blackburn from Tennessee, yanked the AI 10-year ban provision. And interestingly, 99 to 1, the only person who voted to keep it in the process was Tom Tillis.
Right.
So I was just I am a states' rights kind of person, but at the same time, I think a 10-year, a 5-year provision, a sunset to ban, states from just doing whatever they want to do with AI is really critical. But I'm sad to see that go. But aside from that, I think the Planned Parenthood survived because it remained from the approval of the Senate Parliamentarian, which I think you had some things you
Yeah.
want to say.
So we have something called the Senate Parliamentarian. So the Senate Parliamentarian is a non-elected official who's also not partisan. And they follow Senate rules. They look at these they look at the budgetary legislation, and then they have to decide, are you putting this through the Senate properly, right? Following the rules of the Senate? Are you exceeding budget limits? For example, as part of politics, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who's a rhino, she was really opposed to these Medicaid cuts in her state. So, and was also Hawaii, Andres, was
The initial language is that it would apply only to the 48 contiguous states.
Right. So exactly. So meaning the Hawaii and Alaska are off the hook, basically. They don't have to suffer these cuts. And they, obviously the Republican, because then it sounded like Murkowski would come along for the bill, but the Senate Parliamentarian just knocked it down. So it's a matter now if they, Trump is tweeting, just go against the Senate Parliamentarian. I think you need 51 votes to do that. So, it's just, it's supposed to be checks and balances, but until you don't get what you want,
Right.
and then it becomes something else. So just an interesting kind of take on what's going on. Duke has his hand raised. So I'm going to let Duke talk about this for a second before we get to Chris. I don't want to get into a big debate on the big, beautiful bill. We spent all day yesterday talking about it, which was great because everybody was interested. Now Jen wants in on it too, so we're going to let Duke and Jen Duke and Jen in on it. In the chat, I see Vincent saying Collins is a no. I don't know about that. I'm not overly sure about that, Vince. All right, so I'm gonna ask Duke to step in. Go ahead, Duke.
Just an observation, real quick. When you have to bring the vice president to the floor of the Senate to break a tie, it's a very, very bad thing. That there's good and bad in the bill. I've read as much as probably anybody, but if he does cast the final vote and this thing goes south, they'll hang it around his neck just like they did with Kamala and the Green New Deal. So, like I said, it's never a good thing when the vice president has to come. That's it.
Yeah.
Good observation.
Well, my comment's actually not about the big, beautiful bill. It's about, I don't know if any of you saw the press conference, I think it was yesterday, that Trump is taking on Big Pharma and has an executive order that is giving us, I think he called it a most favored nation status. And wherever they sell the lowest cost pres prescription medicine in the world, that's the cost that the pharmaceutical companies have to give to the United States. So we're no longer going to be paying 10 times what everybody else pays. I thought that was pretty significant. So
Okay.
for us,
Pretty significant, and also sounds like a price control that was dictated by one person. So I'm assuming that the lawsuits are going to start pretty heavy from Big Pharma. But
yes,
you know,
yes, they are. He started the battle. He
yeah.
on the bullies. Yeah.
Mhm.
Why didn't I become a lawyer, right?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of drive it back a little bit to the big, beautiful bill. I think this is going to actually end up being like, I think the important thing for Trump that he wants out of this is all the campaign promises stuff that he said he would do will get passed. And I think that it's going to be a 51%, as big as they can manage it. And it might end up being like Vincent had said something in the chat about it being maybe two bills if it goes back down to the House. But I think it's really there's some ambivalence that I'm detecting from the people that I talk to and whatnot about this big beautiful bill. I think Duke put it pretty well. Like there's some stuff that's okay, and there's some other stuff that's just like where's this coming from? And when so we'll see. But I think as long as the campaign promises are in there, which some of them are already marginal like where like I mentioned the tip no taxes on tips very big in Nevada, not so big across the country if you pull it, it's more like maybe a little bit underwater last time I looked, but we'll see.
And Nevada's a key state.
Yep. Yep,
And
that was one of the swing states that went for
yes,
Trump. Honestly was I think a lot of people thought that that would naturally go to the Democrat as it was, but not the case.
And just to add to ML, so there are two mystery provisions. One that we think was solved. One was for a defense spending. There was a
Mhm.
$1 billion mystery project that was for the Department of Defense that nobody claimed that they put into the bill, but just appeared. And so they apparently people talk to DOD and it's legit. So they're still not telling us what it is, but they're going ahead with that. And then when they had the Senate amendment on for Saturday night, this is what they started voting on. There was a mystery provision of excise taxes on solar and renewables. And
Yeah.
again, no single senator has said came from me. Nobody knows where it comes from. So this is the interesting parts of these late night bills where
Right.
people apparently are slipping stuff in, and we still don't know about it.
That's the thing that kills me about these bills. Like
Yeah.
Dan Turrentine likes to talk, the ornaments you put on the tree at the end. It gets ridiculous. But listen, we'll see how it plays out. They're gonna try and get involved. But here's the one last thing I want to talk about is, Trump is so unrealistic and getting these, he makes these demands. And then, so let's say in theory today, they vote on the bill and it passes by some miraculous thing, it passes. So then you go, here you go, Mike Johnson. You have you have Wednesday and Thursday to get this done so it can be signed. I mean, and if he doesn't, Trump will be Mike Johnson's a loser. He can't get things done. It's just so totally unfair to how these people work. But hey, this is the job they wanted, so God bless them. All right, so having said all of that, I'm very excited now to bring in our good friend and our he's an established two-way guy. He's one of the early two-way guys. So, and I got to know Chris from just chatting with him on the two-way and actually fighting with him because of our separate views. But Chris and I have become friends. He's a really good guy. I have tremendous respect for him. And I know he's going to be able to educate us on DEI. And I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. So, Chris Simmons, I turn it over to you, my friend.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. Just for a little background on the varied perspectives I bring to this. I went to Harvard. When I first got out of college, I worked for IBM in sales. Then I went back and got an MBA. Then I worked for a bank and made VP. We were doing billion-dollar loans, helping companies buy out other companies, travel all over the world doing that. So I was working in a very high-end, competitive professional environment. I'll put it that way. Then I went over to Price Waterhouse, was a mergers and acquisitions professional. My specialty was selling privately held companies. As one example, I got sent to Mississippi to sell the company owned by one of the richest families in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. They immediately, well, not immediately, after I found an error their lawyer had been telling them for a decade that would cost them money, my reward for pointing out the error was that they called my bosses and said they didn't want that uppity Negro. That's a direct quote. They didn't want that uppity Negro working on their deal, and they wanted to send me back to Atlanta. My bosses, thankfully, had a weekend phone call and agreed to tell the client that they either got me or they got nobody from Price Waterhouse. And so they had to deal with me. After a while, I was still trying to have some kind of rapport with this client. And they owned a number of properties, but one of the things they owned was a whole lot of timberland. And in order to properly value the timber, we had to take a tree arborist, a scientist of a sort, out. And I don't know why we did it at night. Maybe the temperatures had to be low. But we went out at like 10 o'clock at night in the dark in the woods. And in the car was my white client, a white guy that worked for me who later became one of my best friends and somebody I sponsored to high levels at the firm, and the white tree arborist. And my phone rang, and one of my best friends, who's a real superstar on Wall Street now, called me, and he said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And I said, "You want to know how I'm doing?" Just the irony of the moment washed over me, and I decided to share it with their whole truck in an effort to bring down the relationship temperature. And I said, "Man, you want to know where I am? I'm someplace I swore I would never allow myself to be. I'm in a pickup truck in Mississippi, in the woods, in the middle of the night, surrounded by 3 white boys." And everybody in the truck just cracked up laughing. And actually, I had decent rapport with the client after that. And the reason I start off with that story is that my views on diversity and DEI are born from having lived it, having had to rise up through the ranks and deal with it. And that is a little bit different than some other folk I'm going to describe to you later. After a while, I became the head of mergers and acquisitions for the entirety of PwC for the US. Then my CEO decided that he wanted to give me more visibility. And he first sent me to interview with a guy who ran another business unit. And what the guy didn't realize is that he wasn't supposed to interview me. I'm actually putting the finishing touches on a new 30,000 word book on how to succeed in corporate America. This is one of the ways not to succeed. When the CEO sends a rising star to you and tells you to interview him, that really means find him a job on your staff, make him look good for 18 months, because I got plans for him. Well, that fool didn't realize that. He interviewed me. He did not call me back. And for 2 months, I had virtually nothing to do because my other job had kind of ended, although I wasn't out of it. I took my son's basketball practicing in the middle of the afternoon for 2 months because I had nothing to do. They were paying me. I was happy. And I'm on the bus with the CEO at a partners retreat. And he asked me, how do I like my new job? Because he thought I had one. And again, unlike most Black folk who would have been like, oh my, pounding the table, pissed, I just smiled and said, well, when I get a new job, I'll let you know how much I like it. Needless to say, that guy did not last very long in leadership circles, that one that didn't call me back. And then so in an effort to give me more visibility, because they had bigger plans for me, they said, why don't you run diversity? Everybody in the firm will know who you are. So I ended up running diversity for 3 years and did it very differently, as I'll describe in a second. I did that for 3 years, and then they sent me to DC, where I ran the DC, Virginia, Maryland market. I had 3,000 people reporting to me. I was the face of the firm in the community. If a client got ticked off, I had to go deal with it. And then we had, at the time, 2,000 partners in the US and about, 30,000 employees. They're double that now. but we have a national election where every partner votes on a slate of candidates for the 16-person governing board. I'm the first Black guy that the white guys ever elected to the governing board, so I was doing something right in terms of how to deal with them. So that's my background. I've been part of Asian organizations. I actually was the first champion for Asian professionals in the Big Four. I was the pioneer for gay rights in the Big Four. We did a lot of aggressive stuff during my 3 years. So anyway, so that's a little background on me. So now to DEI, so you know, I kind of might know what I'm talking about. You know, diversity, equity, inclusion really started off, had its roots in the affirmative action policies into the late 60s. Lyndon Johnson basically said, he issued an executive order that said federal agencies had to affirmatively act in order to reverse the effects of institutionalized discrimination. The actual order really only does two important things. It forbids discrimination based on race, and it requires, and some amendments to it later required, people who do business with the federal government to put together an action plan for improving their representation of underrepresented groups. It did not require quotas. Now, some agencies later on had some quotas, and some city municipalities put some quotas in place. They put quotas in place because companies were submitting plans but never achieving any progress. So they said, well, we're going to, force you guys to hit some kind of target. But quotas were not the essence of the programs initially. As time went on, and I will say affirmative action was opposed from the beginning. Justice Rehnquist, if that rings a bell for any of you, Justice Rehnquist, when he was, long before he was a justice, and he was working in Reagan's administration in the 80s, Rehnquist was already penning strategies for killing affirmative action, which Black folk find to be a repulsive thing, because we were only really basically a decade from the end of institutionalized blatant discrimination, but you thought it only took 10 years to wipe all that out, and now you want to get rid of it. Might have affected some Supreme Court decisions when Rehnquist got on the bench, just saying. So when you get into the 80s and 90s and the Reagan time frame, you start to see more pushback against affirmative action. So the business, the community led by a guy named Roosevelt Thomas Jr., who you can Google and read about, he sort of became the guru of the work. And he started talking about managing diversity. And he became an assistant professor at Harvard Business School. I actually lived down the street from one of my sisters. That's just a coincidence. I knew him and his wife, Ruby. And he became the person who got with corporate America and said, we're going to stop talking about affirmative action. We're going to talk about how you manage diversity. We're gonna shift from the moral imperative that this needs to be the right thing to make up for past wrongs, and we're gonna make the case, the business case for diversity. And so part of the logic was, it wasn't just to right past wrongs, but that companies needed the talents of women and minorities. Oh, by the way, I always like to say early, just a little data point. In 1966, I wrote this down. In 1966, based on EEOC collected data, women were 9% of the category called officials and managers that companies report in their EEOC filings. By around 2020 or so, 2023, they've now risen to 38%. So there's been a 29% increase, not increase over what they were, but a share of the jobs. So now women have 29% higher share of management and official type jobs than they had in 66. Blacks have gone from 1% to 6%. So another point I like to make to people is, because in the current parlance, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, seems to get focused on the minorities and the opportunities the minorities are taken away. But here's what I tell white men. If you're really worried about your inability to compete, go look at your daughter and your wife, because that's whose money they took the jobs from you. And maybe your daughter and your wife should be taking the jobs from you. This goes to my point about the hypocrisy of talking about meritocracy these days, because if you go to any high school graduation or the military academy graduation, and I won't say which one for some reasons I'll discuss off the camera, but when I went to a top military academy, like Naval Academy level place, graduation a few years ago, I did the math, and the women were represented in the academic honors ranks at a rate 3 times their representation in the school. So I guess if we're going to be a meritocracy and grades and scores matter so much, I presume we're going to see a whole lot more women generals in the future, because, you know, carrying a rifle doesn't depend on how smart you are. Deciding whether to attack Iran and how does. So let's get over it with the we want merit, because you didn't want women, and you know, Hegseth has said some things recently about women that aren't really good too. So it's white women have been the number one beneficiaries of DEI, not the minorities. And so as we went on, we got a broader definition also of who was being targeted. At first, it was mainly white women and Blacks. Then the Latinos kind of got added to the agenda. Then Asians got added to it, but very unevenly. A lot of companies felt that they had enough Asians, as they would say, because they had a lot of people. I actually had some people tell me, "Oh, we got plenty of those." I had a client who told me that, and I did some analysis, and what we discovered was that, yes, at the entry level, they had lots of Asians. But as they went further in their career, it went down and down and down. And so I actually went on a 57-city tour of their operation and had focus groups with their Asians. And I have a joke about those experiences. And the joke I used to tell was, if you go sit with a group of Black folks, my people, it takes 7 minutes to unearth 70 complaints. But if you get with the Asians, it takes 70 minutes to get 7 complaints. But after minute 70, the dam breaks open and they start to tell you even what they really think. Because their culture is one, they don't like to complain about their superiors. Black folk, we got no problem with that whatsoever. And what I found out, what they told me was, and they really shouldn't have told me this, but you know, they thought I was their friend, which I sort of was. They told me that they had chosen this particular company and industry because they thought that their not so great communications and social skills would not be a hindrance to them. They thought all they had to do was crunch numbers and they'd be great. What they didn't know was, yeah, that's true in years 1 through 2 or 3. But then when a partner wants to leave you behind with a customer all day, you got to have those other skills. So what did I do as the diversity leader? I had the client assemble a national phone call of all their HR recruiters, and jointly we told them, do not bring us any more of this type of Asian. They will fail here, and then they will call us racist. Go on campus and find the ones that can talk and the ones that want to have a beer after work. We can train them on the technical. We can't fix personality constraints and mindset constraints. So now I'm going to spend a little time talking about what the programs normally entail and what they don't. So normally the programs, a diversity, equity, inclusion program will contain aggressive recruiting of the underrepresented types. So you'll go to Black colleges. You'll go to a majority white college. Like, for example, I went to the University of Tennessee, a majority white school, but we targeted recruiting the blacks who would normally think about working in our industry. And the way we did it, because I understand my people, we sponsored their fraternity dance competition. I knew that every black person on campus was going to be there. So we paid for their refreshments, and then we got to do an infomercial in the middle of it and told folk, well, you can make a lot of money working for us. You're a biology major. That means you can do technical work. Think about being an accountant. We have a one-year program where you can get your credentials without being an accounting major. They didn't know this kind of stuff. So we did differential recruiting, education of the opportunities. Pretty much every DEI program inside the company creates what they call a community for the minority groups. So there'll be a Black professionals group, a women's initiative, a Latino group. That's to deal with the fact that oftentimes those minority groups feel very lonely, feel very isolated. And I've had some people say to me, well, why do you need to let them get together? I said, well, remember this. And this is still true. I've been saying this for 20 years. And I say it somewhat sarcastically. I don't know why we need these diversity programs. I mean, come on. We're beyond this stuff. We don't think about race anymore in America. Oh, wait a minute, except for a few instances. When we decide where to go to church, where we decide to send our kid to school and who with, where we buy our house, and largely still who we marry. But other than that, we just don't think about this stuff anymore. And you want to tell me that folk who isolate themselves, and this is on both sides of the equation. I've got Black folk who won't go where white folk are. I lived in Nashville for 5 years. I love country music. I think there's a lot of similarities between country, R&B, and the blues. And the joke I've been telling is, I heard a rumor that there are 3 Black folk in Nashville that like country. I'm still looking for the other 2 because I didn't find them. Because they weren't at Robert's Western World at 5th and Broadway where I went. And when I go, the white boys on stage in Kelly's Heroes, the #1 country band, if you ever get to Nashville, when I walk in, they're like, hey, Chris, how you doing? That's how I was there twice a week. So the reason we have these groups inside the companies is to give people a sense of belonging to people they're comfortable with, that they normally talk to. So if they don't know how to do their job right away, they'll ask the brother that they wouldn't otherwise have, interaction with. We also do unconscious bias training, a big target of Trump's. In fact, in 2020, Trump banned unconscious bias training in the federal government. Well, we're all a little unconsciously biased. The psychologists have proven it on the left and the right. It doesn't mean that we're all inherently racist. It means that because we're used to seeing certain people do certain things, we confer attributes onto them. For example, we have some unconscious bias about height. Actually, it's not even totally unconscious. Do you know that like 13% of the male population is 6 feet over, but 62% of male CEOs are 6 feet and over? And I've got a sister who says that in dating, the only thing a short man can do for her is point her to a taller one. So we got some biases, and the unconscious bias training that I saw in corporate America, it wasn't like telling white folk that they're bad people. It was telling everybody that we are all carrying around thoughts. One of my biggest points has been to tell Black folk, don't assume who won't be your sponsor. My sponsor was an old white guy from South Georgia, from Macon, Georgia, who, and I'm not making this up, and I think you can already tell it in my voice. When I bring that man up, I get teary-eyed. That man treated me like a son. Like a son. We are buddies to this day. But he was the one that told that racist client in Mississippi where he could go if he didn't let me do the work. So we did that kind of training. We put people on promotion panels just to sit in the meeting when they're discussing candidates. So, for example, here's what I did to help women get ahead in the firm. We did force people to put a woman partner on the promotion slate in the succession planning charts. So here's what would happen year after year. A leader would come in and say, "Oh, I had Bill and John and Sarah, but I decided Bill is the better choice." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." I got somebody to go into their travel records to see how many times they had visited each of those three candidates. How many times did you go to the city Sarah runs versus the city John runs? And how many times did you go out on a client call to see Sarah in action? And let me tell you, word got around really fast after the first few times I did it, because I was in a meeting with just me, the CEO, and one other very high partner. And when that leader said, "It's John," I said, "How would you know?" And he said, "What do you mean, how would I know?" I said, "Well, I have evidence that you've never seen Sarah in action." So I repeat my question. How would you know? I pulled his pants down to his ankles in public, and I enjoyed every second of it. But that's what we were doing. We were making sure that when people made decisions that they actually came correct on, okay, I'm not going to tell you have to promote Sarah, but give me a better explanation than you've been giving for the last 10 years. So that's some of what does happen. We monitor statistics. We're not saying you have to get a certain number of people to a certain level. And I actually had a mantra about this that my partners loved. Special standards are never acceptable, but special efforts will be required. DEI is about special efforts. It's not about quotas. Now, maybe some police departments and some fire departments that had long-standing discriminatory issues, maybe some of them did say, you got to promote so many people. But that was not corporate America. And I know because for 6 years, I was the membership chair of the something called Executive Leadership Council, which is all the highest ranking Blacks in corporate America. You can't be a member unless you are within 2 levels of the CEO. Those are my friends, and we used to talk about what each company was doing. We didn't have quotas. Now, some companies claimed to satisfy the diversity watchdogs that they were hitting leaders in the pocketbook if they didn't meet their diversity numbers. I don't believe it, but okay. And they might have taken a little money from them, but they weren't taking that much money from them. That wasn't driving it. CRT, I want to mention briefly. I don't know anybody in corporate America that was talking about CRT. Maybe some fringe lefty professors were talking about that. Black executives are too smart to promulgate that in corporate America because we know it would kill our support base with the white guys who would be on our side. That is something that might be a more recent occurrence by more left-wing types. But I can tell you, PwC, that word never came up. That phrase never came up. Now, one of the biggest problems in recent times, I'm going to stop in about 7 minutes, is that they put equity in there. When I was doing it, it was diversity. Then it was diversity and inclusion. Frankly, I thought we never needed to say anything more than diversity because it doesn't matter to have diversity if you're not including the people. So that was baked in as far as I was concerned. But when you put equity in there, the problem is people thought that meant guaranteed outcomes. And that's not what companies were doing. What they meant when they said equity was, we're going to approach each group or person based on their unique needs. So we might have a special training program for the Blacks on how to get ahead because most of them come from communities where nobody in their family ever worked someplace like this. So that's an equitable approach to helping them succeed. But it didn't mean like guaranteed outcomes, but people tried to claim that it was. The attack on DEI has been going on ever since the 70s. It's just been getting more sophisticated. The Harvard admissions case is put on by the same people who did the Texas case back, I think, in the 90s. There's a small group of folk, I know who they are, a couple of them are Harvard white guys, who have been after any type of adjustment mechanism to right the wrongs of the past. They argue, well, that stuff's over. Everybody is on even keel now. Well, Lyndon Johnson said back in the 60s, you can't shackle a person for decades, not let him walk around, then take the shackles off, walk him up to the start line of a 100-yard dash and say, run with everybody else. In 1978, Justice Blackmun on that version of the Supreme Court said that in order to fix the problems that racism has caused, you have to take race into account. But the Republicans have, by who they got on the court, Clarence Thomas, others, have now gotten the court they always wanted, that they knew would reverse affirmative action and attack DEI. The other thing that's happened recently is that a lot of societal things have been baked in. Trans, girls men in the bathroom, these societal hotspot issues that most corporations actually wisely internally stayed away from. When I ran diversity at Pricewaterhouse, I made it clear to the gay lesbians, yes, I am championing your success in this firm. Yes, we will walk with you in the Pride Parade. No, we will not weigh in on which bathroom people should use. That's a societal issue, and it'll piss off too many of our partners who would otherwise support you. But what the Republicans have skillfully done is they have taken the focus on women's advancement, the focus on Blacks' advancement, the focus on Latinos' advancement, and married it up into one big ball about trans, they, them, and some other what I will call fringe issues, and put it all in one big bucket. So now when you hear the phrase DI, you don't know which thing they're talking about, which is brilliant on their part, because it means it can be a little bit bad for anybody if one of their issues is included in the ball of wax. I didn't want to say one thing about the Harvard case. Why, I ask you, is so much attention focused on something of so little relevance to the average American? I mean, the average American doesn't have a prayer of getting anywhere near Harvard, neither do their children. But the reason is that if you can prove that at the highest level of merit that there is something unseemly going on, then you can justify the assertion that is happening throughout the rest of society. So let me tell you about the Blacks who get into Harvard recently. They averaged 1,400 on their SAT, 700 on each part. Whites average about 740. I think the Asians are about 765 or something like that. At that end of the score spectrum, the difference between a 700 and a 740 is really fairly irrelevant, number one. Secondly, if you look on Harvard's website for the last 50, 60 years, they've said that their mission is to train the leaders of tomorrow. And everybody on this call knows that there is no correlation between a perfect score on the SAT and ever leading anybody to do anything. In fact, there's a proven negative correlation because nerds normally are stupid about EQ and can't get anything done. I got tons of examples of that. Elon Musk, by the way, got a 1340 on his SAT, just for reference. So when I hear people making a big deal about who's getting into those top schools, it's not like they're letting people with a 1200 in against somebody who's got a 1470. And then probably the rest of their case is pretty strong. I've covered a lot of stuff. I'm going to stop there. and let people ask me whatever they like.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot. Before we call on people, Deborah, I want you to get your in on this because you had some good stuff on the chat. But I'm going to talk about. I just want to ask you a simple question because it was so relevant in the election, right? So Joe Biden, when he picked Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential candidate, he made a statement saying, I'm going to pick a black woman or a woman of color, I believe he said, right? So then he picked Kamala. And Kamala, if you look at on the record, I mean, you're talking about a senator, a lawyer, you're talking about somebody who has great, had great, legitimate credentials. We can't deny that. But it didn't translate. And then I think it got piled up on as her, in her candidacy for president, her inability to let's say state the case. So do you think that was also rolled into the DEI complaints on the right, Chris?
It was a penny on the scale. They were coming after it hard anyway, Professor Kenny. I mean, I don't even have time to go into tell you all the stuff that was going on. I mean, think about it. I do think it caused it aided the fire, but it wasn't major. Okay. And Biden was stupid the way he said it, the way he did it. He shouldn't have said. The reason he signaled it was because he was trying to win primaries,
right?
And he wanted the black vote. But as I tell people, I don't think there's anything wrong with what he did because we never have had a black female vice presidential candidate. So what's wrong with saying they're really smart people over there too? I'm going to make sure that for once we pick one of them. What's wrong with that? And she's a senator and a former attorney general of the largest state in the nation.
Yes.
So the people who get too worked up about him saying he was going to do that, it might say more about them than the situation.
Okay. I'm going to call on Mr. Josh Johnson. Josh, please unmute yourself.
Hey, thanks. Fantastic presentation, Chris. Really appreciate your insights in this issue. My girlfriend, who's a deputy city attorney locally here in Virginia, Hampton Roads area, went to a leadership sort of DEI training out in Charlottesville, and and had fantastic things to say about it. It was, I think, about a 4-day seminar. And I think the problem that most people have is the problem that sort of exists in this post 2013, post internet, post iPhone society, where the most dramatic examples and the most egregious examples are used to paint with an extremely broad brush an entire category of what would otherwise be probably almost a universally accepted proposal. When we've got the examples of DEI that are, shown to us on the TV or on the internet, those examples are painted by, Robin DiAngelo and things like that. So
and Charlie Kirk,
and for sure, look, the Charlie Kirks that focus on the Robin DiAngelos,
yeah,
right? That's what I mean. That's what I mean, right? Charlie Kirk, whoever else on the right you want to point to, they're not attending these DEI courses, right? Like they're going to, as they're put in practice.
they're not attending the ones in Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
And And one of the problems is that there's a lot of there's a lot of people out there talking. It's sort of like the first time you heard the term defund the police. And the second Jim Clyburn was asked about that, he said, we're not talking about that. But he's mainstream and these other folk are fringe.
So how do you begin to correct the perceptions about DEI when they're painted with that extremist brush? Sometimes rightly, but most of the times incorrectly.
Well, by doing things like what I'm doing right now, for one, I frequently engage white people when I'm out socially in conversations that get into everything you're not supposed to talk about. And then we talk about it, and then they hear some things that they wouldn't normally hear because they don't talk to Black people. But frankly, the real solution is, well, first of all, let me just say, corporate America is pretty much still doing what they've been doing.
Sure.
They are doing what they have to do to reduce the extent to which they draw the attention of the right. But most of them are not shuttering their programs because they've got too many women and minorities already working for them who they've said for decades that they love, that they're committed to this stuff, and they will look like hypocrites with a capital H if they go too far in the other direction, and they know it. Yeah. So, and I think the real solution is regime change, as topic we've heard a lot lately, which is why I'm very dedicated to getting Vance and his group out of there. And the white nationalist leaning Stephen Miller, who is the architect of a lot of what's happening right now. Anybody who doesn't want to believe, yeah, exactly. Anybody who doesn't want to believe that Stephen Miller has some very interesting ideas, go research the 900 emails that got released of his.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Jen now.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much. That was very informative. A lot I had not been aware of in the history of that. So thank you. Great presentation. I want to bring up from my experience, which is strictly Middle America, Oklahoma specifically, and in the manufacturing sector. So I'm going to talk about what I am calling trickle-down DEI. So I don't know, maybe it was 7-8 years ago, I can't give you an exact timeline, where those very major money movers in the world, the ones that have all the retirement money and everything, the biggest dogs in the world with the finance. And they decided that they were going to assert their influence with DEI. And so basically it became known to corporations that unless you can prove not only that you have a DEI program, but that everybody you are connected with in the business.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with this. Downstream supplier diversity, yeah.
Yeah. That they are going to not give you money anymore, whatever. And so this trickles down to, let's say, a major automotive company, Ford, whoever else. So the people that supply them with all the components and the parts that they use to make their automobiles, they have to not only prove that they have a very compliant DEI program. Everybody who gives the components and parts that make the parts has to. And this trickles down through industry to all, suppliers and vendors, down to, the corporation that I was a huge client of mine, They made a lot of tubes that go into parts that go into cars and trucks. And, so they had to build in an active program. And then, and they had to prove that where they get their steel from has a DEI program, et cetera. So this trickles down all the way to a lot of your small or very moderately sized, like fabricators and stuff. And a lot of those people are out in rural areas, actually. And they have real limitations on their employee base where they live, out in rural areas. They can kind of, in terms of people who will come in and learn and train for the jobs, they get what they get. They get what's available. And ultimately, a lot of companies, it's like, if you don't do this, you're going out of business. And it's not an organic movement. It is blackmail. And I want to tell you, these manufacturing companies in the Midwest and Middle America that everybody knows nothing about or could care less about, they've been hit by one thing after another, globalization, all kinds of things, to the point where, they just can't, it's hard to stay in business. And so I kind of feel like a lot of them had a real reaction to this because it was just one more thing putting them in a vice to keep them from having a kind of success they needed to stay in business or to grow their business. And I think that is what caused the huge backlash against DEI. So.
Well, the huge backlash from DEI did not come from small business owners.
Well,
it came from some people online, like the guy, I can't think of his name now, Robbie Starbucks.
Well, I think that may be true in the vocal sense, but
by the way, just one other little data point I want to throw out, and maybe this is a heavy business owning group, but the group that most supports the current Trump administration attack on DEI is white Protestant evangelicals, more so than any other group.
I would certainly be interested in your data on that, Chris.
Pew Research. I'll send it to you another day.
Okay.
It's an April this year Pew Research report that shows that 72% of white Protestant evangelicals, more than Catholics. Oh, and by the way, and this is why I keep trying to impress upon you guys, there is a stark racial conflict. It's just bubbling just below the surface because 80% of Black folk disapprove of his attack on it. When you've got those kind of schisms in terms of something that people consider important to their people, we're not that far away from blood in the street. Trust me, if the conditions get right, you'll see some return to the days of, the Black Panthers or something crazy like that. The only difference is we're not generally the ones that own the attack rifles. It's usually rural white.
Let me just say, in Middle America, I don't think it was anybody on social media that was moving the needle on this. It was your voters in a lot of these manufacturing companies. And frankly, in terms of white Christian evangelicals, most of them are in Middle America. So
okay.
I'm gonna give you a not a professional response to what you described. You can't expect the son of a man who was in the Philippines in World War II, who spent 4 years overseas, who, when he got back to California in 1946, he got on a train headed for Tennessee. It was a mixed race train, but when they got to Oklahoma, they had to get back into their racial buckets. You can't expect for the son of that man to really be that sympathetic to whatever extra trouble that the white manufacturers have to go through. I have zero sympathy whatsoever.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move on to Deborah Knox. Deborah had some insight in the chat, and Deborah will be our last person that we call on. So once again, I want to thank Chris for his presentation and enlighten us. And Deborah, please tell us what you were talking about in the chat.
Well, I want to back up a bit because Chris, I was very moved. I feel sad and shaking, and I'm being a good liberal of like I'm shaking. Just to hear your story and like, I'm really, what extent I can get in your shoes, only so much, right? But just hearing what you had to contend with and how the heights that you reached in your own career, despite all the things that you were running up against. And I was really moved when you talked about that man that was your mentor and really helped you. It's like, and I'm also just admiring how much you want to make opportunities for other people. Like you are doing this. You're putting your, whatever things you've had to stick your head out, you've had to ask for, you've had to, whatever, right? Like, and all these people who have in your wake or whatever have been able to get opportunities. So I want to say all that first. I almost want to cry because it's like, it really touches me like quite a bit.
Thank you.
Quite
now
a bit.
The fake part.
Yeah. And what I want to say is, I grew up in a very, very liberal family. We were always concerned about like civil rights, affirmative action, all of those things. And I think what happened to me, especially come 2020 and watching the sort of rush of different ways people were trying to address inequality, racial issues and such. Because at first I was like, oh, great, companies are doing something. And then I started to look at it and I started to realize it seemed that there was a particular theory of change about how do we get people to, and I want to say two different things. There's one is hiring, pipeline, getting people aware these jobs even exist, getting people interested, and that's sort of one end of it. And then the other part is like hiring my employee and I need to, we need to change your attitudes and thinking. I'm going to talk right more about that part because I do think a lot of the sort of these sort of pipeline initiatives, going to schools that never get recruited by some of these big companies, like all of that. Like I think letting people know they can have these jobs, letting people know what training they should get, providing them mentorship, like all of that, I think this is great. I started looking at, and I'm going to put in the chat, I can't get my spreadsheet up, but there's an organization. Well, one organization I looked to work with was doing diversity, but it was called Diversity Without Division. And it was not doing more of the identity groups kind of thing. And so and we were even potentially talking to one of the top HR organizations in the country about doing something like that. So I was already had my toes into this field, but then I don't want to name names, but another organization that was considering getting in the space a little bit because a lot of people were coming to them saying, we're trying to introduce DEI, but it's causing a lot of problems in these companies. And they asked me, do you think we should get involved in this thing or not? So I started to research as much as I could find, survey best as I could about the field itself. And so I put it together a document, everything from, what are the different reasons why an organization might be doing this, and anything from we do just want to hire more people to larger, more left political things. Some of it's just compliance. Like there's a real range of why companies do these things. And then I also surveyed the research behind, and this is one of my big bugaboos, is that there isn't a research base for a lot of the things that are being done in the training. Like the validity of the test, that tests implicit bias, that in any way that translate to an individual person taking it. And because of that, we can say something and then we have to kind of root this out. So a lot of my objections to a lot of the training are they're often getting no results, or their companies are becoming more either fragmented or people are more mistrustful of each other. And I would rather not, rather not have that. So I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but I will just put a link in the thing about this thing. And I do want to say, you were talking about
well, it depends, Deborah, on how the trainings are done and
right.
what the
and
I
did a survey of a range of types of them. And some of them are probably anybody would go, this is great, right? Some of them are all the way down to telling people that whiteness is bad And, and it's, and that might be a small percent, but those exist. And I know a case of a suicide. There was
Deborah, I'm sure they exist just like fools on the left and the extreme right exist. What I'm telling you is the world I lived in, at least, upper crust corporate America, that stuff just isn't tolerated.
I have a classmate from Stanford Business School who is very involved in these types of, and trying to get all of us to take these trainings that are very much on this sort of racial. So that's one instance. It's an anecdote, but these are people at pretty high levels in companies. And so I hear what you're saying too about Fortune 500, and maybe it's not happening on that. Anyway, I just want to show you, you guys can decide, did she compile anything that's any sense? Is she cherry picking? Like, I'll leave it to you. But I can't figure out is I have a spreadsheet and I can't figure out how to get that into Google Docs. What I'll do, if anybody wants that, I can email you. I'll give you my email address, but I will put the Google Doc for just the survey of.
I also just want to point out that white college educated and above college educated white collar professionals are not shown to have had a lot of opposition to the diversity programs in their companies. This is one of the things that I find interesting because it's really a MAGA thing. And so what's happened is that MAGA, let's think about the companies that Robbie Starbucks first targeted to do the boycotts that got corporate America scared to keep doing DI. Of course, before Trump threatened them all with lawsuits. It was, come on, somebody help me out. It was Tractor Supply, a couple other companies of that type where it's rural, it's white, and it's not college educated consumers. That's who really has a problem with DI. And my thing is, y'all ain't working in the Fortune 500 anyway. You can't get a job there. But this thing has started on the outside, and then, but combined with Trump's attacks, the companies are now saying, well, there's a lot of white folk who won't buy our stuff if we keep doing it, because Robbie Starbucks is going to put us on his list. Jesse Jackson used to have a list they were scared to be on if they didn't have the programs. Now Robbie Starbucks have them scared to be on his list. But I never saw or heard of a lot of tension inside the companies of my friends who were high ranking at the biggest name companies in America.
Well, you also can't say very much either, because I mean, I know people who got struggle sessioned, that it's a little hard to object.
All right, folks, listen, we've run over, which is fine. And so we're gonna end the show. And if you guys want to,
CEOs were all saying,
what's that, Chris?
You're right, Deborah, because the CEOs of these big companies were telling all their people, get with the program or get out. You're right.
Okay. All right. So like I said, we're done for the day. If you guys want to continue a conversation, you can go on to America's Talk Show. Yeah, unfortunately, I apologize to Raul that we ran over. I forgot about we go into his show, and we've already taken time. But this was awesome. And, you're not going to see this on the two-way. You're not going to see this kind of discussion on the two-way. Nothing against, we're all here because of the two-way. We love the two-way. But you're not going to see this kind of discussion. And I think it's enlightening and important for us to hear these things and understand them. So good job. For tomorrow's show, we'll obviously deal with the big beautiful bill again, and whatever the local the latest political thing is with Andres and ML Shaw. But then we're going to go into health. I want to talk about health, and I'm not talking about RFK health. I'm talking about your health and my health, and how do we deal, especially I'm 61 years old, full disclosure, but I know our demographic here is definitely over 40 and over. And how do you deal with staying, keeping yourself healthy? Have you had cancer? Me and my beautiful cohort Jacqueline, the blonde, she's a cancer survivor. I'm a cancer survivor, and she's a yogi and a Reiki master. So gonna bring her on tomorrow to talk about trying to keep your health going to longevity, you know, and Chris also like drinking a glass of red wine at night, you know, it's good for you, you know, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about that. And
My daddy lived to 100 drinking it.
yeah. And you know, so today was a good show. Just let everybody know we did live stream. I just got started late on the live stream, but I have a full recording of this show, which I'll put up on Step Into the Cafe Americana YouTube channel so everybody can watch it. Pretty sure we're gonna have sound, so we'll be good. And I look forward to either talking to people later today or definitely seeing everybody in the Cafe Americana tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Chris.
listening.
Excellent, Chris.
Thank all you guys. Thank you
Good
very
job.
much.
Good job. All right. See you at the next Zoom.
Bye.
Tag,
Just
you're
jump. We just go from Zoom to Zoom. That's all we do. Hey, Kenny. By the way, I'm good for Thursday this week.
Oh, good. Thank God.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Okay, so I think we did good today. And I you know what I did wrong with the live stream? I didn't realize I had to go back into the YouTube channel and go live.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I messed up.
Oh, hey, Dan just jumped in. Does he
Yeah,
want to
I'll
talk
let him
about
in
something?
for a sec.
Yeah.
Let him in. So I'm gonna actually we should talk to Dan when
Yeah.
he connects because Dan says he wants to bail,
I know.
and I don't think that he should do that. Although I have to admit if he's getting a little burned out on it,
There's lots of
I am.
issues. Yeah. Wait, where did he go?
Well,
Where did he go?
Dan's been on vacation. I've
Yeah.
you know, I saw him on Facebook, and I was like, enjoy, take the time.
Yeah, he's in
You're
Palm
great.
Springs, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've been to the resort to these, and I kind of told him like he probably was there with his wife and daughter, and he realizes,
Well, that's the thing. This thing, even you know, my girl, she's like, you spend too much time on this stuff.
Well,
and she's not wrong.
No.
well, like our parents and grandparents used to say, when you're dying, you're never going to be on your deathbed saying, I wish I spent more time at work.
Right. Right.
Well, now the 21st century would be, if you're dying, you're never going to want to say that you spent more time, on Zoom calls
If only
talking
I
about
had,
politics.
if only I would have saw that one more tweet on X or that one more YouTube video.
No, I mean,
True.
hey, Chris got a lot of courage. Look, Chris got a lot of courage for even trying to talk about that subject. It's so polarized, and it started with the affirmative action case with Blake Bakey in 1979, and then
Bakke.
Reagan. Bakke,
I wrote a whole paper on it. Reverse discrimination, white guy versus
and then
Japanese students.
Then
Or
Reagan,
Asians,
when he
yeah.
was campaigning, jumped on it.
Yep.
And then that's what started the whole many Republicans being against affirmative action. And I've said it to Chris. Then when Reagan campaigned, and I witnessed this myself at multiple campaign stops, I was a supporter. He would talk about welfare queens, black
Yep.
women who were driving welfare Cadillacs. And there was one woman that was collecting